30 miles away offshore, on the island of Nantucket, a haven for readers and writers, the Nantucket Book Festival presents its answer to social distancing. I'm Jane Alexander, Nantucket Book Festival alumna, welcoming you to At Home with Authors.
How do you get people to see that this is not just another story of a black guy who had it tough?
On this episode of At Home with Authors, Mitchell Jackson, whose voice has emerged from a marginalized America.
30 years of my life was basically a cliche. I played basketball, I sold dope, I had a mama on drugs, I didn't have a daddy there, I went to prison, so really I'm just the average black man. But this makes me more than average. I feel like my book is my salvation.
That first book, The Residue Years, a novel set in his hometown, a black red line district in one of America's whitest cities, has now been followed by a memoir, Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family.
The chance to redeem yourself comes in many forms, and this is just one way for me to redeem some of the hurt that I caused.
Jackson joins us in conversation with his longtime friend, producer and Nantucket Book Foundation co-founder, Mary Haft. They spoke on May 21st, 4 days before the killing of George Floyd.
Mitchell Jackson, hello, old friend, hello.
Hey, how you doing, Mary?
So happy to see you. We met, I don't remember how many years ago, it was through Penn Faulkner.
Yeah.
Had your book, The Residue Years, that had come out.
Yeah.
You and I started a conversation that has continued, really, through the year.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, pretty amazing. How are you?
I'm doing, under the circumstances, I'd say I'm doing pretty well.
And where are you?
I am right now in New York City in my apartment. I haven't actually left my apartment in, it has to be 70 days. I'm not really counting, but it's been quite a while since I've touched a New York City street.
Which is really remarkable. And, you feel like COVID has really laid bare and cracked open the world, but It's also, again, cracked open and laid bare the disparities, the huge, societal ills that we've been grappling with, all of which sort of makes your writing so much more important and so much more timely. And I wonder, and I'm reading about creative people, artists, writers, COVID has presented either while they are quarantining, and you really are very much in a cocoon, or it's an opportunity that they're being more creative, or it's that opportunity to draw back and kind of ruminate and percolate, knowing there will be this other day in which maybe that's when you do write, paint, draw, create. Where are you in that COVID mix?
I think I'm getting a little bit of both. Before the pandemic started, I was on a fellowship at the New York Public Library called a Coleman Fellowship, which was a year to research a project. And so that fellowship actually was supposed to end this month. They just extended it. But I was already researching and writing for months. But I also had just come off of the pandemic interrupted my paperback book tour, but I was already in the mindset of reading and writing. And luckily my children are grown enough that I don't have to homeschool, which would have presented its own sort of obstacles. But I was already in the mindset of that. So I've been working too. But I think with this much time home, you have enough time to ruminate and work. I was working on a prologue to my next project, and I was have been spending 10, 12 hours at the desk, so much I have to get up and stretch and remind myself to eat. So I'm a person that's really trying to take advantage of this time. And I actually would have been, I would not have wanted to be forced to stay home, but I intended to be spending a lot of time in the office researching and writing anyway. So it's not much different than the plans that I had for myself, except that there's like a world crisis going on outside here.
Exactly. But, the person that I know of you, I mean, I think of our conversations that can go for, my goodness, for hours. I think the last time I was in New York, I think you
Yeah.
left at about 2:30 in the morning. Even I was,
Yes, I did.
I think we even cracked, our record.
Yeah.
But the person I've known you to be is somebody who really you're so intense, and you bring all of who you are into the work that you do,
Mm-hmm.
to your teaching. I know you probably profoundly influenced so many of your students. But I'd like to draw back to the beginning, because
Mm-hmm.
you had posted this on Instagram, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll go back over this because the reason you posted was a bigger one. But
Mm-hmm.
I look at this face,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and that really marks a beginning of so much, and what ended up being the beginning of a literary career. Tell me about this young man.
That young man is the culmination of, I think I was 21 years old when that was taken. So he was already 10, 11 years in the making. And by that, I mean, I had already been around my mother. That was the night I got caught for selling drugs. I actually remember where I was. I had played basketball with my friends and had a significant amount of drugs on me, and was like, oh, go put this up. And then I didn't. And anyway, I ended up getting arrested. But I was also a college junior at Portland State University. So I was a student. But if you backtrack to say that was 1996. If you backtrack to 1985 or 1986, my mother is just beginning to use drugs, and my life is kind of splintering in the way that the children of addicts go. And so that was like the beginning. It set me on the path to that young man you see. When I look at him, I see someone that's scared and also knows what the repercussions are of what he's done. But it wasn't like an overnight thing. Like, it took a long time to get there, and it took a long time to get from that guy to this guy with the gray hair in his beard.
Well, that's what, when you read The Residue Years, which is such a powerful, powerful book, but it's so much about a heart that is beating throughout. It is about
Mm-hmm.
love, it is about family, it's about those ties that bind, and those ties can break us, but they
Mm-hmm.
also hold us. And
Mm-hmm.
it's in the holding that the power of what you have created exists. And your book does make clear this was in the making. Um,
Yeah.
so tell us about your family life, and what, you're a little boy, what is it
Uh-huh.
like?
Well, when I was a little boy, it was like an extended family. They say it takes a village. My village was a lot of great aunts and great uncles and my great grandparents. And we lived for a long time with my great grandmother, who had a really large house. It's the house actually that I fictionalized in The Residue Years. And yeah, so it was a lot. I was going to church. I was in the church choir. It's probably in fourth or fifth grade, so 8 or 9. I started to fall in love with basketball, so I played a lot of basketball, and I played little league baseball, and then around 85, like I said, my mother was like really one of the early victims of the crack cocaine epidemic, and slowly I started to see the repercussions of that. And then I started to see my peers getting into selling drugs and making money off of it. And it pretty soon it seemed like there was, the two choices. I could kind of let what was happening with my mother overcome me, or I could figure out a way to get on the other side of it. And so I chose that, and I did that I did it for a little while in high school, but I stopped. And then once I graduated, I actually took scholarship money and bought drugs, and I kept that going for maybe 3 or 4 years, and that's when I was only supporting myself through doing that, and looking out for my family. But I think people say, like, well, what happened in prison? You change your life. No, I didn't really change my life, and I didn't really change the person that I was. My circumstances changed, and I had a couple of breaks. One of them was that my scholarship was held for me when I went to prison. And so So I think a lot of people talk about like rehabilitation. And I remember having a conversation with this writer and justice advocate named Boz Dresinger. And she said, it's not rehabilitation because most of the men were never, or men or women, were never rehabilitated, were never habilitated to begin with. And so I don't think I was ever a youth that was habilitated. So prison didn't rehabilitate me. It just made me see what the consequences were in a way that was inescapable for me. And I decided that I didn't want to live out those consequences. That I also figured I had some kind of talent, or at least that if I worked hard enough, I could produce something that that was meaningful to me and to my community.
And you more than did. There's a line you have. So it's Mr. who's telling Champ. It's a mother's story, and Champ is the son. And he says, listen, don't forget this. Don't let this slip your mind. Most of us, if we're lucky, we see a few seconds of the high life, and the rest are the residue years. And, you know, I did that line, and it's actually I get a little goosebumps, but, you know, it's as if your writing makes so clear throughout. You do have messages of consequences, of choices. You make choices. And you also really, you talk about, and in your documentary, there's a beautiful documentary about the residue years. And it takes you back. You walk through the prison that you had been in, and you see inmates and you talk to people. But what was so striking to me was also this sense that a lot of kids on the street, like basketball or sports, that's their out. And the limitations of life and choices and opportunities, you know, which are really circumstantial. You know, you see it's where are you born, what schools, what neighborhoods. And the book really does kind of lay bare choices that one faces as they keep making their road. And you own the choice you make. You don't shirk from it. You really face into that with such courage.
It's funny, my mom sent me a text this morning. She said, I'm so proud of you. All of your choices have brought you to this moment. And I was like, wow, that's true. That is, her choices have brought me to this moment. Like, you can't disconnect the choices that I've made from the choices that she's made. And so we're stuck in this.
So the time that you spent in prison, what point did it begin to strike you that maybe you had a gift for words? Maybe you had a way to tell this story differently?
I don't think it ever struck me. And what struck me in prison was that I was going back to college, and that I really wanted to kind of acclimate myself or reacclimate myself as much as I could to being a student. So really it was being a student that saved me, because wanting to reacclimate to going back to college made me consider writing down what was at that point, it was like my life story, and it was going to be nonfiction. And then I started to consider what would be the repercussions of writing my life story, and including these people who were still in that kind of life. And I thought that would be harmful to them and unfair of me. You know, you don't do that when you sign up for the kind of life that I was living. You sign up for all of the repercussions, and one of them is that you don't bring other people down, because everyone knows, you know, most people know what the consequences are. So anyway, so I started writing my life story. I brought those pages home, and I was lucky that my then partner, when I told her, you know, I want to write a book about my life, that she didn't just laugh at me as, you know, here's a guy that's come home and has these grand dreams, and everybody has grand dreams when they come home. So she encouraged me, and it took a year or two, but again, going back to school, I went to graduate school for creative writing. They had just started a program, and that's what kind of ushered me along. So at every step, it was really kind of a school pulling at me, saying, if you do this, you might be able to do this. And it's the same way that I actually started teaching. I came to New York, and I had this felony already, and I was tired of filling out applications, and people were asking me about it. You know, and having anxiety over whether or not to check the box. And someone called me and said, hey, don't you have a master's degree? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, here, go talk to this woman. And it was at the College of New Rochelle. And I went in there. It was actually this woman named Marie Brown. She's a longtime agent. One of the they call her the godmother of Black publishing. And Marie sent me to a woman at College of New Rochelle. And the woman said, Marie sent you? And I said, yeah. She said, you're hired. And I had never taught a class in my life.
Just like that.
Just like that. She
Wow.
said, Marie Brown sent you, you're hired. And that's how I started teaching. So again, if I would have never been writing, I would have never met Marie Brown. I would have never been, tugged into a classroom. And then from that, now here I am at the University of Chicago. So school is really what saved me.
And I'd love to sure get that message out more and more and more, and give it as a message of hope to so many, but also hope for people who want to do the right thing and help others. That is, education is the answer, giving people tools to be able to do this. But nonetheless, what Residue Years made clear is that, in fact, you actually have a gift, Mitchell Jackson. You have a gift for crafting. And I know it's a gift, but it's work. I know that craft of writing is real work. But you created, there's a musicality to the language. There are times I was laughing out loud. One line that I was texting you that I don't want to say it on this interview, but I mean, it's funny because we're taken along in your journey. At one point you're talking to us as the reader,
Yes.
people, let's go. And, but it's a voice unlike anything I had read. And the language, the cadence, the story, of course, which is so real. You did this right. You were trying to write with such honesty and truthfulness about a journey, but you, with such humanity and compassion, you feel for your mother, who all she wants to ever do is be the best mother she can be. And addiction is a trap. It's a vise. It's very hard to break that. And somehow in the Residue Years, the best of writing brings us with you. The best of writing, we get to walk a mile in another's shoes. We get to actually feel like we're a little bit in the skin of another.
Yeah.
That's what your book really did. We carried in a journey. But the writing and the voice, that's something altogether yours. How did you find that voice?
So when I was in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm from, when I first got into a writing program, I was reading the Oregonian, and there was an article about this writer named Chuck Palahniuk, who had a really big book called Fight Club that came out. And it was a movie with Brad Pitt.
Right.
And, and so I read about him, and then I read that he had studied in this. It was like an independent workshop this guy held in his basement. The writer's name is Tom Spanbauer. And I was reading about Tom Spanbauer and Chuck Palahniuk, and I was like, wow, I got to get a hold of these people. I got to find them. And so I hunted down Tom, and he had this class in his basement, and Tom wouldn't let me come sit in the class. Chuck wasn't in it anymore, but there are a lot of other prominent writers in that classroom. So he would let me come sit in and just listen to his philosophies. And one of the things that he really talked a lot about was about the sentence. He called it dangerous writing. He said you had to write about something that was dangerous to you. And then also he had all these kind of philosophies about how to make a sentence. As it turns out, Tom Spanbauer was one of the first students of an editor named Gordon Lish. And Gordon Lish was in the 80s and maybe into the 90s, the most famous literary editor alive. And he was also Raymond Carver's editor, which is a whole other story. He's back and forth with Raymond Carver, but he basically made Carver. And so the philosophies that Spanbauer was espousing were actually Gordon Lish's philosophies. So years and years later, when I was in New York in probably 2008, 2009, Gordon came out of retirement, and I somehow read about it. And I took a class with him one summer and learned all of that stuff. He would lecture us for like 6 or 7 hours straight without getting up to move or go to the bathroom or anything. And it was all about sentence making, and here's what you listen for, and here's what it looks like. And he would say, go home and write a sentence. And if I like your first sentence, you're going to read them. If I like your first sentence, you can read 2. If I like your second sentence, you can read 3. But if I don't like your first sentence, you can't read it. And so the next class, everybody comes back and he's like, all right, read your sentences. So he goes around the room, calls your name. And I was like in the middle of the group, and he called me and he was like, okay, Jackson, read. And I said, she held it for safekeeping. He said, okay, go on. I was like, whoa, one sentence. I said, she held it for safekeeping, and then she took it back. He said, yes, yes. I said, the rent money from under the mattress. He said, stop, Jackson. He said, listen, don't you ever ask for anyone's sympathy. Do you hear me? Don't you ever do that. He said, but I'll tell you one thing, Jackson, you got an ear. And once Gordon Lish said, Jackson, you got an ear, it was like Jesus tapped me on the shoulder and said, you can do this. Like, and I was already out of 2 graduate writing programs. I had already had 2 master's degrees in writing, had published some short stories. But when he told me that and then started giving me or reinforcing all these philosophies, like that was really a turning point for me. And that was also around the time that I got a book deal for the residue years. He actually read the manuscript, and he sent me a postcard, the postcard sender. He's like, this isn't a book, Jackson. You should throw this away. And at that time I had worked on it for like 12 years. And I remember sitting on my couch and I just cried. I was like, damn, my hero said, throw out my life's work. And I cried and I called him. I was like, Gordon, I got this postcard. Like, you know, your handwriting's a little sketchy. Like, is this what you mean? He's like, yeah, Jackson, I recorded the phone call. Throw it out. And, you know, if it's whatever's good in there, it'll be there. And then I had to decide whether or not to throw out 13 years of work and listen to my hero or try to revise it. And so I decided that I would start revising it, given the philosophies that he bestowed me with. And then he called me back like 2 weeks later. He was like, Jackson, that manuscript, I want you to take it over to this woman's house and leave it with her doorman. And that was Liz Darhinshoff, who's a huge literary agent. And she's actually, I think she might be Stephen King's agent. Yeah, she is Stephen King's agent. Anyway, I took it over to her door, and eventually Liz became my first agent and helped me publish that book. So Gordon Lish was instrumental in changing my voice and also helping Residue get into the world.
Well, that story is amazing, from sort of anointing you as a student. Yeah. And yes, your sentences are singing,
mm-hmm.
to keeping you going when the discouragement, which I can only imagine, the discouragement when it's like your idol is saying, no, you know, throw this away or start over. But then to stick with it, to the strength, there's fortitude. And this is what I know about you too, Mitchell. There's such fortitude and strength and determination in your very character. You're built of such fun stuff. But I still think, to be young, starting out, and having invested 12 years of your life in creating a work, it's, you know, it does feel like sometimes good guys get to finish first. Like this story, that it has a happy ending, that it resulted in, you know, the residue years. And I know nothing more thrilling than a book lives, really a book lives forever. And to be able to hold on to this and know you did it and you told this story right. You know, and again, in the documentary, we met your mom. Now, of course, what figures, as I said, this is a story of a mother and a son, and there's such humanity and heart and broken pieces. To see your mother in that documentary was kind of extraordinary. And the pain that both of you carry for a childhood you can't get back. You know, you can't take back those years. And yet here you are with the sort of happy ending. What did your mom, when the book came out, and she had an opportunity, you probably let her read this before too, but what did your mother say? Because this story lays bare a mother-son journey.
Yeah. I don't know if mom has read the story, but when we were shooting the documentary, I had to obviously talk to her about what was happening, and she said to me, you know, I'm going to do this because I think it might be able to help someone. And if it's able to help at least one person, then that means this was worth it. And I was very thankful to her, because to me, that was saying that she was she was okay with sharing our story, which meant the book and the documentary to me, right? Like the book is fictionalized, so you don't actually know what happened. But here I was, actually showing her, showing my grandfather, showing my father.
Mitchell kind of like lost his mom too. He lost his mom when he was 10. I really believe it wasn't going to be a problem, but it became to be my excuse, and then it became an addiction. I'm sorry that I got hooked on drugs. I'm sorry that it took me so long to even realize.
I mean, after that documentary came out, I didn't even speak to my father for like 4 years. We just started talking
Wow.
2019. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. He was upset about how he was portrayed in it. And he never told me this. He told family members, and yeah, we just stopped talking. So there's consequences. This is not a happy ending, but this is also, I remember I had two things. One, I always joke with my friend that I'm built for this. So whatever the obstacle is, I always tell them, yeah, I'm built for this. I actually just told someone that yesterday when they're like, how you holding up? I'm like, oh man, I'm built for adversity. The other thing is I remember the very first piece of nonfiction that I published was a story called Almost Famous. It was in a newspaper called the Portland Tribune. It might have been 2001. And it was on three of my former friends, or they're not my former, three of my friends who are former college basketball players, who all of them were supposed to go to the NBA, but none of them made it. So it's called Almost Famous. And then I interviewed two of my friends who actually made it to the NBA. And I remember my friend who was the most successful, his name is Damon Stoudemire. He ended up becoming Rookie of the Year in the NBA and playing 15 years in the league. And I said, what were you thinking when we were all growing up and, we were making our plans about what we were going to do? And he said, man, I never had a backup plan. I was going to make it or I was going to make it. And this guy is 5'10", 160 something pounds. So just imagine a little 5'10", 160 pound guy.
Yeah, I'm not a big sports person, but that's not really cutting it for basketball, right?
Exactly. So for him to decide at 15, no backup plan, this is it, and to actually achieve that, to me, that said a lot. And I've actually thought about that in my career as a writer. There's no backup plan for me.
Well, the no backup plan has worked for you.
A little bit.
Yeah. But, again, I kind of love that you and I have this long relationship, because one of the trips to New York for me was when you were embarking on your next book. And
yes.
What I remember, and it's like that great Maya Angelou quote about, you may not remember exactly what was said, but you remember how they made you feel.
Yeah.
So while I can't remember the specifics of what you told me, what I remember is how I felt, what I felt with you. I felt with you the weight of what you were carrying. I felt the weight, the burden. You were trying to tell a story, tell it true, tell it with integrity, with strength, and yet mindful of consequence of human relationships.
Yeah.
This is the book that you were writing, and here we are.
Yeah.
Survival math. And survival math, which is it's a calculus. This book,
yes,
it's so interesting. I love the cover, because it's a calculus of survival. How do you survive? And you're going back into your own world here, which was you're going back onto the same streets, into your life, into your family, into your friends, and you're working this calculus of survival. So explain the concept of this book.
It was, so when I was towards the tail end, right before that mug shot, it was really hard for me in my neighborhood. Partially, I think, because I was in school, and so people knew that about me, and they knew, well, you can't be committed to being a drug dealer if you're also a college student. And so I was a mark. And 2 or 3 particular times, I felt like my life was at risk. One time I remember getting kidnapped and, kidnapped at gunpoint. And I just started thinking, man, like, what am I going to do? Like,
Wait
am
a
I going to have,
second. You're kidnapped at
uh,
gunpoint because you can't have a lot of money on
no,
you.
no, they were robbing me.
They were just
Um,
money. Okay.
yeah. So anyway, so this was like what was happening in my life. And then, there was one time when a guy who I knew, who I'd gone to school with, and who had tried to stage a home invasion with some of his friends. And I ended up finding out about that from my kind of OG. And so then I'm coming out of a house and I see a guy on a bicycle, and he's in a distance, so I can't tell who he is. But by the time he gets close enough to me, I realize it's the guy who tried to break into my house. And he jumps off his bike and he pulls his gun out on me and he points it at me and he's like, "Yo, I heard you was looking for me." And I look down the street. It's like 5 a.m. and look down the street. There's no witnesses. It's a sunny day. I'm like thinking of all the things that I've heard about this guy, how he's been in Seattle, shot somebody, how he's always robbing people, how he's, angry. And I'm like, damn, is he going to shoot me? Then I'm like, well, man, if he shoots me, is he going to shoot me in the head or the chest or the leg or the foot? And will I be able to survive this? And I also have a gun at this point, but it's locked inside of my car. I can't find my keys. So I'm like, wow, I think I can get in my car. Or what if I let him ride off? Can I jump in my car and chase him down and shoot him? And well, damn, if I shoot him, then if I don't kill him, is he going to come back to my family? He knows where I live. And, but then if I do kill him and someone sees me, am I going to go to jail? All these things are going through my mind in a split second. And what I say is, no, man, I wasn't looking for you. And he's like, yeah, because, I'm a real killer. And he gets on his bike and then he rides off. And if you fast forward maybe another year, 6 months, he does end up getting caught for murdering someone. I think he had murdered someone before that, but he does murder someone. And then he goes to prison and he murders someone else. So he wasn't lying when he said, I'm a killer. Anyway, so years and years later, when I was thinking about this book, that incident came back to me, and I labeled the calculations that I made between him asking me a question, which really wasn't a question, and me answering as a calculus of survival math. And then I started thinking, whoa, I wonder what has been happening to my family. And this was also around the time of Black Lives Matter, and Black men were being portrayed as dangerous. He's wearing a hoodie, or he's, Mike Brown looks hulking and all these things. So I really wanted to challenge that myth. And so I asked all those men on the cover of that book, what's the same question? What's the toughest thing you survived? And then I wrote their stories in a second person narrative. I use the second person again. This is the craft side, because I thought second person would allow a person who had a really disparate experience to imagine themselves as the actual protagonist. And then also it works like a first person narrative as well.
It's also there was a little bit of protection too, because you're also not identifying. You don't
yes.
identify who's who in
yes.
each story. So there's a little
right.
protection there also.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I promised him, was a kind of anonymity, because I run the photos with the stories, but I mix and match the photos. So the photo that's next to the story isn't necessarily that person's story. And that was one thing I wanted to give them, because I'm like, I signed up to be a writer and to have a public life, but you didn't. And so I was very thankful that basically everyone that I asked in my family did it. So it's uncles on there, my grandfather, all of my brothers, cousins, nephew. So it's 3 or 4 generations of men in my family on the cover of that book, all of them with a particular survival story.
You ask her if it's fine for your daughter to come home, and she clarifies that whether your daughter does or doesn't is in the jurisdiction of the courts.
And I think one of the extraordinary things about it is all of those men either grew up or spent most of their lives in Portland, Oregon, which is not really known as a locus of urban crisis, right? So all of these things are happening in a place that's like, if you look at the news, it's like white heaven.
Well,
So,
no, wait a second. Make that clear about Portland, because I learned that through your writing.
yeah,
Portland had a unique place in
yeah,
segregationist American history. What
yeah,
explain that?
yeah. So Portland was the only state admitted into the Union with an exclusion clause in its constitution. So from the very beginning of Oregon as a state, they did not want Black people to live there. And I think that ethos has permeated Oregon culture, politics since then. So when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I didn't know why my neighborhood or why my state or city was white. But as it turns out, it's actually systemic, right? Like it didn't just happen to be white. And one of the things now, I'm working on another project that is set in Watts. And the guy who was the catalyst for the Oregon exclusion law was actually the guy that tried to get the same thing passed in California.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So California was like right on the brink of doing what Oregon did.
But I look at this and I think, and yet here is a community
Yeah.
of Black families, Black men, children. Here's a community that's almost, it feels like it's a little microcosm, self-contained almost microcosm in which so much can foment. And out of that, of course, your story is the American story. It's running the gamut. What do you say? But this story picks up and it's mirrored in not just urban areas, but it's mirrored all over our country today. What do you say to a young person? Because you look at all of these young men like yourself, young women, you now are a father, you have a son, you have a daughter. What do you say to those young people and to their parents, caregivers, grandparents? What frame do you give them to hold on to?
Man, I've been thinking about this a lot. One, I've been thinking about this idea of a criminal. And so, for 10, 15 years of my life, or 12 or something like that, theoretically, they could still label me a criminal, right? Like I have a felony, I went to prison, I did actually commit crimes. But it seems like, especially in this past year, or maybe if you can even really point to during this pandemic, what is a criminal? Like if I did some crime with the president and he decides that he wants to release me or pardon me, am I a criminal? So to me, it's kind of hard to talk about what you shouldn't do to a kid right now, because people are committing crimes openly, being convicted openly, and then being exonerated or forgiven and marched out of a prison. And so what do you tell the person whose uncle sold drugs and bought them a house or bought them a car or paid their rent and is now doing a life sentence for, 10, 12 ounces of drugs? Like, I don't think that you can convince a smart kid that the idea of crime and criminals is the same, or that it has ever been the same, because I think now it's kind of been laid bare. So to me, then, well, what do you do? Like, you can't depend on kind of the system to protect you. To me, then you have to fall back to the community. And what are the morals? What are the morals? What are the ethics of your community? And hope that is able to sustain you, and that community has some kind of resources.
And that's where we get into these bigger systemic issues, which COVID really, this crisis is laying bare, because who's proportionately hit?
Yeah.
Of course, it's the people that have the least. And you look at all that. But the thread back again to the writing, to the book. So when you're kind of Portland's native son now, right? You come home and boy, they must put the ticker tape. Yeah.
Well, no ticker tape. I mean, I think the good thing about going home is that you're always the person who was there before any of this. And so I appreciate that. But I also do appreciate that one of the things that I really take serious is that there are not a lot of Black writers who have made it to a kind of national awareness out of Portland. I can think of one or two, maybe. But so to me, that puts in this a particular pressure on me to represent us. And I have been fortunate that some of the people in my community have taken note of that. So, I mean, when I went home in, must have been February, for my paperback book release, they have, in my old neighborhood, they put up a permanent, like, it's like a art installation. So it has like my picture and my books and the quote from the book up there, because they said that it's like to commemorate the old neighborhood. So it's a neighborhood that's now been gentrified, but they have they call them historical markers. So I have a historical marker home, and the year before, they dedicated a library to me in my old youth center. So those things make me feel really good about what I'm doing, and I also feel like it sets an example for, people that are coming behind me, that this is another way.
There is another way. And, to understand education, this is another Instagram post, and actually enlarge it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what is that photo?
Yeah.
That photo is?
Yes, that is a New York Times Square billboard of survival math. They actually did it for the hardcover and the paperback. I'll be honest. I pushed for the paperback. It was their idea for the hardcover, and then I said, well, we got to do it again. I love this cover, and luckily Scrivener got behind it. But that's really important to me, because to me,
a billboard on Times Square. I don't know that many writers that have a billboard on Times Square.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, it's like I'm a guy from Portland, Oregon. I grew up. I mean, even when I was in Portland, like you can say I'm from Portland, Oregon, but I'm really from like an area of Portland, Oregon. Like I didn't move. It wasn't like I was all over Portland. There's still a lot of places I haven't been in Oregon. So I'm really from Northeast Portland, and from Northeast Portland to come here to make a way for myself to, I mean, I came out here because I wanted to be immersed in the literary life. That's why I moved to New York, and to, it's took damn near 20 years, but, it feels really good for those kind of things to happen, because it feels like, okay, you made the right decision, and here's encouragement to keep pushing.
But it's also, as you say, I mean, yes, it's a light for you, but you are lighting up a road, an avenue, a choice that you hope is an inspiration to not just the younger ones that are coming up, but I look at the community, and I think I'm always so warmed and encouraged by, you're part of a big community of writers. And I have had the kind of gift of being able to be in the midst of all of you, and sense that, wow, you're all for each other. You're all cheering each other on. It's a remarkable thing to see, where in other fields you can feel people are competitive.
Yeah.
Almost as if, well, if one rises, it's taking something. Not here. I've never been more kind of embraced by this sense with all of you, is every success is a success to celebrate. And it's across the board. But, again, it is a singular voice that you have, Mitchell. And when I was going through both Survival Math and The Residue Years, and there are sentences that like leap out for me, are there sentences or phrases that you'd said, I did it, I got it?
So I was thinking about this last night, Mary, and I'm trying to remember because I didn't actually go look in the book, but the reason why I didn't look is because I'm like, if this is really the sentence, then you shouldn't have to look it up, Mitch. So the sentence that I was thinking about last night was, you can wait on a life or take a life, but once you're in the life, well, there it is. And I think that is Mr. talking to Champ. So you can wait on a life or you can take a life, but once you're in the life, well, there it is. And I'll say why I think this is my sentence is because, you know, to me, all of this is about like seizing a life for yourself, right? No one sells drugs because they want a worse life. They do it because they want a better life. And so you can wait on it. You can wait for the system to give it to you, which is probably not often the case, especially in these kind of circumstances. Or you can take it, by which, some people start robbing people, some people rob banks, some people they become a pimp, some people, whatever they do. And I'm not minimizing or dismissing a person who is harming people with the way that they are trying to achieve a certain kind of stability. But okay, so you can wait on a life or you can take a life. But once you're in the life, which is if you're doing those things already, and then why I like this is because it's like, well, there it is. And to me, part of good dialogue or good prose is when there's like the iceberg, right? So the well, there it is just the tip of the iceberg. And then there's everything else that comes along with, well, there it is. Like you should know, like once you're in the life, here's the iceberg of consequences for you. So that was it. And then this morning I was thinking, if I had it to do it again, I would write, you can wait on a life or seize a life. But once you're in the life, well, there it is. And the reason I would change take a life to seize is because I think when I say take, some people might interpret that as me saying kill someone.
Right.
And I don't mean that. I mean actually to take it. So there's a sentence that I really love because it's doing a lot of things, and it's like leaning towards something else, but then also because I'm constantly revising in my head and on the page, like one trivia fact is between the hardcover and the paperback of Residue Years, I found like a typo and I made an edit, and then I called my editor and I was like, hey, can I fix a typo? She's like, sure, Mitch, you can get it on the next printing. Then I saw something else. I made a sentence change. I called her back. I'm like, hey, I saw like 2 sentences. You think I can do it? She's like, yeah, no problem. She's like, just don't go crazy. Then I started making other changes.
Going crazy, right?
Yeah. I
crazy.
called her back and she was like, Mitchell, you cannot make these kind of edits. If you do, we're going to have to retypeset this book and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. And I did it. So there is a significant difference between my hardcover edition and my paperback edition of the Residue Years. And this sentence is kind of like, if I had to do again, I would go back into my paperback edition and put seize instead of take.
Well, seize really it's a good word for you, because I look at this life. I look at this life understanding really its very beginnings. And you have grabbed this life and you have made this extraordinary journey. The difference is you've taken all of us with you. Your writing has brought all of us with you in this journey. And that's been a remarkable thing to behold. And I think about, in the time that we're in, and I think about the quote. It's one of my favorite quotes. I think I put it on several of my Christmas cards through the years. But, it's Leonard Cohen, and there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And it feels like that pertains so much to you. There were big cracks in a life. But the light, you let that light come in. Where is the light for you? Where is hope? What do you see? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Really, I think writing is probably the most hopeful thing that I have in my life, because it's a way that I engage with the world. It's how I make sense of what's happening, either to me or to people or things that I care about. And it's also, to me, a way to be an exemplar. Like I'm on a thread. I'm on 2 threads. This is interesting. Well, at least I think it's interesting. So I'm on 2 threads. One of my threads is with writers, right? And on that thread, there are like 2 Pulitzer Prize winners, probably a National Book Award winner. Like, it's a serious thread. And we talk about writing stuff and political stuff, right? But we've been having the thread go for a while. And I have another thread of all my partners from back home. Some of them they just work a regular job, but some of them are like former NBA basketball players. Probably 4 or 5 of them have played pro basketball. And then that's a different conversation that we have. Like, really, those conversations do not overlap. And I think what I have recognized for a very long time in my life is that I am in the middle of those conversations. I am in the middle of those two kind of concerns. And so to me, that's what I try to do in the work, is show that I'm neither way over here or way over here, that I'm somewhere down the middle of these two things. And I can understand both of them because I've lived, a long time as a college professor and as a writer, and I've lived a long time as a guy from Northeast Portland, and I played college basketball too. So to me, that gives me hope that I'm able to kind of barrel a path down the middle.
Well, your beating heart and your literary soul and your journey is the gift that you give your readers, because you get to travel that road with you. And for that, we are all so very grateful. And, Mitchell, for you and me, if conversation is a dance, I hope we keep dancing for just so many years to come.
We do the Running Man.
Exactly. You may have to give me some lessons there. Honestly, joy to see you. And we're also very grateful that you've joined us. This is our Nantucket Book Festival, visiting our authors at home. And it's joy that you are one of the authors that we get to visit with in your own home. So thank you, Mitchell Jackson, for being.
Thank you. I'm sad I missed Nantucket, but I'll have to get out there soon.
Oh, we'll do. Absolutely. Oh, you have a rain check anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, with me. All right, Mitchell, thank you so much.
Thank you.